For almost all of you, the teachers that you get next year are going to be very different than the teachers that you had in high school. Some of you are going to go to big educational institutions, and because you're freshmen, a lot of your teachers are going to be these graduate students who think that they're smarter than they really are, and they're going to also be working on their own academic careers at the same time that they're teaching you. So they will be stressed, they'll be inexperienced, they'll be kind of basket cases. Others of you are going to get professors, full on professors, especially if you were lucky enough to get into a really good, really small private school. And some of those professors are going to be different than what you're used to because they don't really want to know your name. They might not be very nice to you. They're not very kind or understanding. But all of these things are part of the academic life, which is where I think most of you are going. What I'm saying is, I want you to think about Vivian Baring, and I want you to think about the kind of professor that she was. She was the kind of professor who there was quite a bit of competition to get into her classes. You will have professors like this when you are in college, and there is real competition to get good professors while you're undergraduates, especially. And freshmen are almost always at the bottom of that barrel. I want to begin with a scene in the play where Vivian is talking to students and she's really unkind to them. Vivian even says, "Now I suppose we shall see through a series of flashbacks how the senior scholar ruthlessly denied her simpering students the touch of human kindness she now seeks." She's realizing that at times in her life she was unkind and unfeeling and cruel, and she regrets it. She doesn't say she regrets it, but I can tell by the fact that she's thinking about these things on her deathbed that she does, in fact, regret it. You have this, I think, very funny scene where the students are mocking her a little bit by playing with the word expansion, which they take to make fun of that word by pronunciation and graduation. It's a funny little bit of banter, and the dying Vivian realizes that the kids were just being witty, quite frankly, and funny. Um, but one of the students asked Vivian in the flashback for an extension on her paper. And Vivian says, almost mockingly, "Oh, your grandmother died." Well, Vivian has heard this before. I mean, let's face it, you're 18, your parents are in their 50s or older, your grandparents, if you have four of them now, like people lose grandparents while they're away at college. That's the real common thing. Vivian has heard this excuse before, but she says it in a mocking way. But this student is dealing with death. Perhaps this student is dealing with death for the first time in her life. And what Vivian does is cruel. And she says the paper is due when it is due. It is unflexing, it is unfeeling, and she refuses to sort of recognize the student's humanity. And to be honest, I don't think she even knows the student's name, or she would have said it or remembered it. She doesn't. Vivian pinches her IV tube, and that causes the pump to ring a little bit of an alarm. She does this as a means of drawing Susie into her room. She just wants some company. She just wants some affection. I notice that the character Susie calls her sweetheart and talks to her very much the way an adult would talk to a scared child, but not in a condescending way at all. Susie is the most genuine person in this play. She's kind and compassionate, almost in a two-dimensional way. One of the things she does is she brings Vivian a popsicle. I don't know if you have popsicles like this here, but a lot of times popsicles, at least when I was a kid, come with two sticks. You take them out and then you break them in half and you share them if you're of a generous spirit. But She brings in a popsicle and Vivian shares it with her. It's a way to keep Vivian there. This is a moment of intimacy and a moment of kindness. Vivian and Susie have this important conversation where Vivian says what she's suspected or known all along, that her cancer is not being cured. And Vivian says they never expected it to be, did they? And of course, she admits that she knew this all along. Now, her tumor did get smaller, but the cancer showed up in other places. And it's important to remember that the research that happened will probably help others. But sadly, Vivian is facing the fact that she's going to die. Vivian and Susie have a conversation about her code status. Eventually, Vivian decides she wants a DNR, which means if her heart stops, nobody's going to make an extra effort to start it back up again. They shouldn't use paddles and epinephrine and other drugs to get her going again. If she does pass away, then it's best to just let her pass away. Now, the other thing that's true is when people are dying of cancer, often in their very last stages, they give them what's called a drip. It's a bag that has morphine in it, and the morphine goes into their body. Some patients have a little button they push whenever they need the morphine, but the doctors, Kalikian, decide that Vivian shouldn't have that. She should just get the drip. The drip's going to make her unconscious or not coherent anymore. That's really the beginning of the end. Because the irony here, and the paradox, is that the morphine actually shortens your life, but it does make the excruciating pain go away. It's a way to pass away in peace, but your mind slips away. And so once that morphine drip starts, Vivian's not really going to be able to have open conversations with us anymore. She's going to be silenced from the rest of her play. She says about this that this time now is not a time for verbal swordplay, for unlikely fights of imagination, and wildly shifting perspectives, for metaphysical conceit, for wit. All of those things she has no more time for. Now's a time for kindness and for things to be simpler. In some of her last lines, Vivian says, "I'm scared. Oh God, no, I want to hide. I just want to curl up in a little ball." And it says that she dives under the covers. There's a scene change, and then we see Vivian in horrible pain. She is tense, agitated, fearful. Slowly she calms down and addresses the audience, trying extremely hard. She says, "I want to tell you how it feels. I want to explain it, to use my words. It's as if I can't, there aren't, I'm like a student and this is the final exam, and I don't know what to put down because I don't understand the question and I'm running out of time." This moment in the play reminds me of Waiting for Godot and also Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, because we have that moment of theater of the absurd where the character doesn't have lines to say, but they need to say something or express something. It says this: "The time for extreme measures has come. I'm in terrible pain. Susie says that I need to begin aggressive pain management if I'm going to stand it." And then she says, "It," such a little word. In this case, I think it signifies being alive. At the end, she screams out, "Oh God, oh God." And you have to think to yourself, is this an interjection or is she truly calling on God? I think Edson goes for this purposeful ambiguity every time she uses that expression. Susie wants for her to be put on a morphine drip, the kind that I forget what she calls it here, but it's the kind where the patient gives themselves morphine. There's but Kalikian says ordinarily yes, but in her case, no. I think that's because Kalikian knows Vivian Bering, and she knows that she would fight all the way in, and he also knows that maybe this is really a time for her to rest. Vivian repeats her line from the beginning of the play in her last speech of the play. She says, "Hi, how are you feeling today?" But then she says, "These are my last coherent lines. I have to leave the action to the professionals." It came so quickly after taking so long, not even time for a proper conclusion. But then she says this, and I think this is the most important line in the play. And death, capital D, shall be no more, semicolon. Death, capital D, thou shalt die, exclamation point. She's making a point exactly the opposite of her professor. The death really is a big deal. It's worthy of a semicolon and an exclamation point. It is great. As Susie puts in the morphine drip, like into Vivian's arm, Vivian says to her, "I trust this will have a soporific effect." And Susie says, "Well, I don't know about that, but it sure makes you sleepy." The stage direction says this strikes Vivian as delightfully funny. She starts to giggle, then laughs out loud. Susie doesn't get it. "What's so funny?" Vivian keeps laughing. "What?" "Oh, it's that soporific means it makes you sleepy." "It does?" "Yes." "Well, that was pretty dumb." "No, no, no, no. It was funny." I want you to notice that Vivian's last words are teaching words. As she's dying, in her very last coherent, she's teaching, and she's teaching that thing that she loves, that language. When Jason comes in, he starts to talk about Vivian as he's working on her, checking her fluids, checking her charts. But when he talks about her, I want you to know that he speaks about her in the past tense, even though her heart is still beating and she's right there. "Oh, yeah, she was a great scholar." And then he checks her charts and checks the hydration, and he gives her some ideas about. Susie puts in a catheter. Vivian probably can't feel it, but it's going to collect her urine until she passes away. I do want you to notice that it's Susie who still talks to her with dignity and humanity. One thing about tragedy is, in our deaths, as we face death, that's what modern tragedies teach us, that we want to keep our human dignity, that it's always a struggle for that. I've always thought one of the things that Arthur Miller got wrong is it's always been about that, but that's my opinion. Anyway, Jason and Susie, they talk about John Donne, and Jason shares his idea that John Donne had salvation anxiety. He puts it like this: "And you know you're a sinner, and there's this promise of salvation, the whole religious thing, but you just can't deal with it." And so it becomes like a game, like a puzzle. When you're thinking about that, I want you to think about Tom Stoppard and also Waiting for Godot. This idea of life being like a tennis game or like a game or like a puzzle or meaningless. Jason even finally says it outright. The puzzle is what takes over. As she's dying, E.M. Ashford shows up. She knows that Vivian can't really hear her or understand her and that Vivian is very near death. She thinks about reciting something to her. She mentions John Donne, and Vivian is alert enough to moan, "No." But then she reads her the story of the runaway bunny. It's a story a lot of people hear when they're children. She does make one little interjection about that story. She says, "Oh, look at that. A little allegory of the soul. No matter where it hides, God will find it. See, Vivian? And Vivian just moans. But we get it. It's what this play is about. It's what John Donne is about. This separation between us and God. As she's leaving, E.M. Ashford says to Vivian, "It's time to go, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." I love that line. "It's time to go" has a dual meaning. She's leaving, E.M. Ashford is walking out, but it's also time for Vivian to go. And then that last line, "and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." I hope you remember, that's what Horatio said to Hamlet after Hamlet has been almost killed. He's saying to Hamlet, "Okay, it's over. You should be able to rest now. We've had it."